welcome to the first episode of the 5 Thread podcast. In this mini-series, I'll be interviewing 5 women who are changing the game in sports apparel. I'm excited to kick off the first episode with a very special guest, Lily Rice. With over 10 years international design, production and brand experience, Lily is an accomplished and award-winning designer who's worked both on bespoke collections and mass-market consumer wear at sportswear's highest levels. Beginning her education at Central St Martin's, London, before graduating to specialise in performance sportswear design, Lily then went on to work at football's top levels for brand powerhouses Umbro and Nike, before deciding to pivot her career to set up a female-focused brand. The brand, Lexi, won international acclaim and investment while being sold globally. With a change in lifestyle, she closed the label in 2015 and moved into freelance design work, working with clients like MyProtein, Herrera, and Martini Racing. Today, Lily juggles creative director roles, design projects, and most recently the start of a new label that's just gained its B Corp pending status, an ethical teamwear brand called the Long Run Club. Lily is passionate about creating the garments that the world really wants and making a positive impact in the life of the wearer and on the world of sport. I am so excited to talk to you. You have such a wealth of knowledge because you have been in the industry and done so much in the industry. I kind of just really wanted to start by giving the listeners a bit of context about sportswear. You know, how does it differ from fashion, for example? What are the environmental issues that sportswear faces? And how does your work really help change how we do things?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think as a whole, fashion is very damaging, both ethically and sustainably. And obviously sportswear plays a huge part in that because most of our garments are made from plastic-based sources. So whereas if you're a designer within fashion, you might have the opportunity to perhaps kind of only work in certain fabrics, just due to the kind of performance aspects of sportswear on a whole. With budgets, most garments are kind of using polyester and elastane, and these are kind of pretty problematic fibers. We've got a lot better in the past 5 years, I would say. There's bigger brands having more pressure on them to kind of fund research and be shown to be doing things, but we've still a massive way to go in terms of making real impact. I think so many of the big brands do a one-off campaign or a little show campaign where it's kind of like, oh yeah, we're doing recycling, but it's only in certain stores and you can only recycle certain things. Or, oh, we've made this garment and it's made from all our offcuts and here it is. And you're kind of thinking, but was that the most energy efficient way to do that? Could we have done that a different way? So sports was pretty problematic environmentally, but I think there are a lot of people in industry doing some amazing work that, you know, are trying to change that, move it forward. We've had a huge trend with sportswear and athleisure wear with COVID and people staying at home and then wanting to work out more. So it's certainly not a trend that's going anywhere. I think most people now have a sports wardrobe of some kind, and so the demand is only going to grow. And so it's really important that we solve those kind of environmental and ethical problems within sportswear.
And there's a stat, and it's around about like 80% of environmental impact is determined at design phase. So, you know, how important is it that we think about it from the very start versus, you know, waiting till we've made the product and expecting the consumer to be able to, you know, do something with it to make it sustainable?
Yeah, I think it's really nice that as an industry, we kind of put that onus on the end consumer to be like, you do the right thing and you recycle it. But yeah, as you say, actually, so much is decided when we're designing, from the actual garments design in terms of circularity and longevity, the fabrics we use, the raw materials, the production, where we're having it made, how we're having it made, and also building in repairability. So sometimes you can design in a certain way where the garment could be deconstructed, or you could supply the end consumer with patches to kind of help them along with things like that. So I think it's definitely something we need to be working on more. I think in the education system, it is being taught a little bit more. It certainly wasn't a consideration when I was at university. It's not even something that was mentioned. But I think there needs to be more pressure on us as an industry to be making those right choices and less pressure on the consumer, because marketing can really blind the consumer as well. I see so many marketing campaigns where I'm like, really? There's recently one that really irked me recently was a certain pop star launched a sustainable athletic clothing range that I don't think particularly went anywhere. I only knew about it through industry. And then she's recently been a face of Primark. And I know Primark themselves do some good initiatives. I'm not saying that they don't, but when you view the business as a whole, comparatively to other smaller businesses that are making great choices, there's no way to say that Primark is a sustainable business. It's just not fair to say that or accurate. So I think it's just really interesting that, you know, through marketing, an end consumer could be really misled, and then we're putting the pressure on them to make the choices. It's not fair.
I totally agree. I feel like even as somebody who works in the industry, it's such a minefield. You know, the term sustainability is almost meaningless now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard to navigate because you might take one action that you think is sustainable, like in material choice. But when you look at the full life cycle of that garment, you know, how it's going to wear, whether it's durable, whether it can be recycled, you know, if you just pick one aspect, yeah, it might look great, but the full life cycle, it's a completely different story. And I don't feel that brands necessarily have the skills or they're doing the due diligence enough on that. I really feel there's a big gap, and sportswear, like you says, has these specific challenges because of performance. It's trying to balance the two. I'm interested to kind of talk about your history with brand. You know, you have set up your own brand previously, Lexi, and now you have just got B Corp pending for the Long Run Club. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Before I do, I just want to say as well, I think there's a really important discussion to be had around kindness and then greenwashing. So, you know, I think there are certain bigger brands that certainly greenwash, and putting out a marketing story where you're saying you're doing X, Y, and Z when you know full well, oh, it's only with that trainer or that pair of leggings, and actually we're a multi-billion company and the rest of it's, you know, trash, is very different to a small brand who are saying we're sustainable, we're using recycled fabrics. Now, as you said, that's not necessarily sustainable, depending on your definition of the word, because you might be using recycled fabrics, but if your product's not of a good quality, it won't last, you know, X, Y, and Z, then it's not actually sustainable. But actually, they're doing that from a place of trying to improve, of trying to be honest and trying to do the right thing. And I think in the world outside of industry as well and within, I see a lot of trashing of companies of like, oh, well, they only do this. And I think, all right, that's a bit more fair game when you're talking $1 billion brand. But when it's smaller brands, it seems a little bit unfair. And I think there's a lot to unpick there of what's greenwashing and what's trying to take steps, but you haven't got there yet. So yeah, kind of in that vein, we've set up the Long Run Club, which is a teamwear brand. We've got our B Corp pending status, which means because we're under a year old, we've gone through the initial B Corp process, but because you don't necessarily have all the information to prove everything because you haven't yet done it, you can't get full B Corp status. But it all means that from what they've seen, we should get that if we continue in the way that we are. And we just thought there was a real gap in the teamwear market, because teamwear itself tends to be very kind of almost a fast fashion model of like, oh, quickly turn it around, make anything, get it out there, you know, get it on the backs of people, wear it for a year, and then that's it. So we've worked really hard to kind of make really good material choices, remove trims so that when things are at the end of life and they've been worn out, they can hopefully be recycled. We're seeing more and more developments with recycling, and I've been lucky enough to be part of a few projects that have kind of looked into further recycling, because elastane is such a problem at the moment and it causes such issues. So yeah, just kind of forward thinking with our designs for the end of life already, even though we're less than a year old as a company. We use European manufacturers who are sustainably powered, and, you know, we've met them and been to the factory. So we've kind of checked that out ethically. And then really working with clients that we feel align with our thought process. So kind of making sure that, we choose who we work with, and we work with people that share our beliefs so that we can all move together on this journey.
It sounds amazing. And I just want to jump back to kind of your first point. When I work with brands, especially smaller brands, they are so terrified to put something out there because they're like, people are going to criticize us. We don't always have the resources to measure everything before we put, so that we don't have the baseline to track it almost. So, I mean, how have you found that starting a brand and the communication around what you're doing? Has it ever worried you and you've kind of thought, I'm not going to say that because I'm not sure about the reaction? Or what steps have you taken to ensure that you can, with integrity, call yourself a sustainable brand?
So with the last brand that I worked with, Presca, my position was creative director, and I outlawed sustainable. I was like, we're not going to say sustainable anymore, because I was so fed up with it. I feel like we're kind of on the downwards. We reached a peak where everyone was saying they were sustainable. And I know like there's a lot of new legislation coming in, especially in Europe, around what brands can and can't say, which I think is great, super positive, and support that fully. So it's a difficult one, because the word that a lot of consumers generally look for and understand is sustainable. And big fights around, but search engine stuff and all this stuff. But I think ultimately it's about honesty. I am a consumer. I talk to our consumers the way that I would expect to be spoken to. And I think admitting that everything is a journey is really important for smaller brands, rather than pretending that you've got everything nailed. Because as soon as you pretend you know it all in any kind of aspect of life, there'll be someone that is cleverer than you, or wants to point that out to you. It's just human nature. So with the Long Run Club, especially, we've gone down a path of, this is a journey, we're not perfect, we'll be honest with you, this is what we are doing, which was interesting in itself, actually, because initially we kept our sustainability piece on our website really brief, because it was that thing of wanting to be honest and just saying what we needed to say. But then the feedback we were getting from clients was, can you tell me more about your sustainability? Can you give us more? And during that time, we were going through the B Corp pending process. So we knew that once we got that, it was kind of a stamp where people would take that and accept it. Although that in itself is also, a huge discussion, because some really big brands have got B Corp. And this is not to say as a big brand you can't be ethical, sustainable and honest. Obviously, there are big brands that are. But it is interesting when you look at some of the brands that do have B Corp, and how long these marks that are set up to verify us all can last if they're being spread so widely and not kept rigid and super strict. So yeah, B Corp itself was a discussion, but again, it's something that consumers look for and that people understand, and rightly so. Like, you do have to have a level of trust around these things. So that was important for us.
I mean, I think there's so much there, Lily, that's kind of sparking ideas. I've seen a lot of brands lately shift away from this word of sustainability. I've seen a lot of people replace it with, we're a responsible brand, for example. But I do think it's just about being honest, and also being really clear on what you don't know and areas that you can improve, and there are a lot of people who will tell you how to do your job better. And it's almost like inviting them in and saying, great, if you can, of a way that we can improve this, come and join us, come and give us that advice. And I think also the governance of kind of credibility and that trust with, certifications and things like B Corp is so important, because those are like the touchstones that really help us kind of navigate the trust in all of this. I'm interested because I know you had the brand before Lexi. Is there anything that you have learned from Lexi that you've put into the Long Run Club? And, kind of how did that evolve from having a brand and closing it to then starting a new brand?
I smile because I can't remember who said it. I think it was, so Richard Reed invested in Lexi. He's one of the founders of Innocent Smoothies. And I think it was Richard Reed that said it in some book around how he was like, I would rather hire someone that's had like failed businesses behind them than someone who's never started one. And I was part, Lexi I founded, and then I was part of Presca, which is sadly closed as well now. And you could look at it and be like, oh, 2 failed businesses. But I'm like, 2 failed businesses? Because yeah, it's sad. Like, you put your heart and soul into those businesses and you fully believe in them. And I did and still do. They were both great brands. And in different circumstances, then I think they would have flown. But there's a reason why brands don't always make it, and those reasons can be so varied. With Lexi, I was super young. So I think I started that, what would I have been, early 20s, no business experience, no one directly in my family that kind of had that hands-on business experience that was kind of coaching or mentoring me. I got investment to start the business, which I would argue is a terrible idea. Unless you know what you're doing. You hear about these stories of kind of tech people and they need the investment to start, that's totally different. But with a fashion business, a brand, a sportswear business, it's hard because you're wanting to place orders for stock and kind of get that going, but actually scraping that money together, minimum viable products, not spending money on marketing, because everyone and their mother will start telling you, oh, put money into digital advertising, put money into big photo shoots, campaigns. We really did Lexi on a tight budget, but we had that pressure of having that initial investment. So I think from memory, we had £30,000 invested, which, depending on how you look at it, is a small amount of money or a large amount of money. It just kind of depends. It certainly wasn't enough investment to be like investment, but obviously it was a really great starting pot of cash. So yeah, I really learned that for me, and it is the advice a lot of people gave me, and I think it's relevant to a lot of other people, although people do it on their own. For me, having some kind of team, having a co-founder is really important. Now with what I do, I have someone I work with, and they have the opposite kind of skill set to me, and that's super important. I would say I'm business minded in terms of brand, product, consumer, trend. I see all that. What I don't love is kind of financial forecasting and EBITDA and that kind of stuff. So I'm not great on that side. I can understand it. I don't want to sit in a room and do it. So I would say that was a really big learning lesson. And then with Presca, I joined the brand when it was already established, and I think again they took investment, potentially too early. And with investment just comes a load of pressure. It's pressure to perform, to hit targets, maybe to structure a brand in a way you don't want to do. And that word as well of always growth. And yeah, of course, if you start a brand, you want it to grow. But what does grow mean to you? It might not mean the same thing to an investor. So loads and loads of lessons, and it's all been so valuable and amazingly helpful for the Long Run Club, starting that from a totally different place.
I mean, I feel there were years of wisdom just in that last answer. There was, like I say, so much that I took from it, but like 4 key things really stood out for me. One is this discussion around failure. I don't think we talk about failure enough. I think we shy away from it. We hide it. We don't share it as though it's something that, we shouldn't really do.
Love failure.
And I think, I know there's a podcast, Learn to Fail, but I do really think there's so much value in failing and having the courage to fail. I think it's really important. Essentially that's innovation. Unless you keep trying stuff, you're never going to like innovate or be able to drive newness. And that idea that we expect businesses to never fail, like a business is going to go on forever with this infinite growth. It's just not realistic, just reframing that narrative, I think is so important. The second thing that I think is really interesting is this idea of investment. A lot of people talk to me about, do you have investors? And I'm like, no. I just feel like if you're not willing to put your own money in there, if you've not got skin in the game, it's a different story, and I do feel like a lot of people design a brand and then they're like, oh, I'm going to wait for somebody to give me money and invest in this. And I can see your eyes rolling there like, yes.
It's that hustle culture stuff though,
Yeah.
like all these words became buzzwords of like hustle culture, work until you drop and all this stuff, get investment. And like, don't get me wrong, I love a Dragon's Den. I am like, and actually, like, if we're all going to be honest here, because we're with friends, so my investment came through a TV show, which was like a baby Dragon's Den. So I totally ate that up in my 20s and thought that was the vibe. But I feel like there's a lot of pressure on businesses to get investment. Now, what does that mean? Like, do you know what that means before you're doing it? No one's giving out free money. And you shouldn't have to get investment to feel proud of your business. There are some amazing businesses, like international, global, mega businesses that never had any investment, into the point where the founder sold it or whatever. So I just have a little bit of a bugbear with this whole thing and it's something we've said with the Long Run Club. Like when I started it, I was like, I just don't want investment. That's not where I want this to go. I feel like it's a strong brand. It can grow organically. We can set the pace. So yeah, going back to the original question of like, oh, what did you learn? That's one of the mega things I learned was if you're going to set something up, and I think this goes over a lot of subjects, like going back to sustainability as well, like set your own rails. So what does sustainability mean to you? What does business success mean to you? Where do you want your brand to go? Not where do you feel it needs to go, like in terms of other people telling you you must have investment or sustainability means this or success means this. So that's been really important.
100%. And I talk to clients and I'm like, what do you want the investment for? And half the time they can't give me a clear answer. They're like, yeah, we're going to need it at some point. But yeah, it's also, like you say, money doesn't come for free. And it's not just the money you're taking, it's the investor. And you have to be really careful of who you bring into your team and who you bring into that brand. The other thing that I picked up before was very much about know your skills, like know your skill set and hiring people where you don't necessarily excel. I think there's a feeling like we should be great at everything and, we're going to found businesses and just like rock it all. And I think, again, it's really important to have that team that can support you and so that you can excel in your strengths, but actually have other people who are maybe more analytical, other people who are creative, and together have that winning team and not try and do it all. And I do feel a lot of people are like, no, I've got to do everything and I'm not going to hire in help or support because I should be able to do it. And again, I think almost that does set you up for failure, because how much can one person do, especially while juggling other things like family. A couple of other points, that idea of defining growth, and I think we are now in an era of, well, what does growth mean? Before it was always like, we just want to make more money. But when we start to think about like circular economy models, this idea of degrowth or, people, planet, profit, which aligns with B Corp, that we're not just measuring it now in one metrics, it's not just about the profit. And, that goes into my last takeaway that you were saying is almost like define your success. Is it that you just want to make as much money as possible? Or is it that actually you really want to do good work and you want to almost leave a legacy and you want to work with purpose? And I've seen a real shift over the last few years of people just wanting to work with other people and brands that really align with their values.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that is happening. But I think as well, going back to defining what you want, there seems to be a pressure still, this kind of capitalist vibe of like, your business isn't successful if you don't make £1 million, but actually, so I was a part of a really small cohort at university. We were one of the first classes to study performance sportswear design at Falmouth. I think there was 6 or 7 of us in the class. I think out of that 6 or 7 of us, maybe half are in industry, if that now. And that's, that's for different reasons. Sometimes you do a course and then you discover it's not what you wanted to do, or family life takes over. But, for me, success is being able to still work in the industry I love. I always wanted to be in fashion, and then it made a lot more sense to be a sportswear designer. It was one of those things where I was like, oh, actually not that kind of fashion, this kind of fashion. But for me, that is success. Would I like to build the Long Run Club to a multi-million-pound brand? Yes, I would. would I do that at the expense of selling out my ability to pick up my kids from school, to stay true to the brand ethics we've set the brand out with? No, probably not, because I don't think making £1 million brand is that difficult if you're willing to sacrifice everything else, with a bit of luck. And obviously you've got to have had some experience. I think if you're willing to put everything else to the side, you could probably do that. But personally, I think that would be pretty painful for both yourself and the planet, because fast fashion is probably the quickest way to make that kind of business. And that's what we've seen, really. If you kind of look at, these huge brands that have had a massive explosion, that's the route they've always gone down. And they may not have started that way, but they have then turned into this stack 'em high, sell it quick kind of vibe. So yeah, I just think if someone's starting a business, or even if you're been in your business a long time, like, you can always pivot the business. It's never too late to be like, actually, this isn't what I want. I want more of a work-life balance. I want more of a planet balance within the business. So yeah, I think it's a great time. There's a lot more support and information around how to do those things.
100%. I think for me, I used to work in quite a corporate business, and now I run my own consultancy. But success is being able to have complete flexibility over my day. I can pick my kids up if I want to, I can travel. And just having that autonomy, to me, is so refreshing, and it's worth so much. And I think we can kind of underestimate those kind of unseen benefits, which are really important. I want to kind of change tack a little bit at the moment in terms of some of the research that you're doing. Now, I know that you're working on an ACL project for people like me. Can you tell us more about that, and kind of tell us why you felt it was necessary to look into this area?
Yeah, sure. So my dad took me to my first football match when I was 4, which was not a wise parental choice, because it was a Millwall match in the early 90s versus Bristol City. Well done, Dad. But it kind of started in me a lifelong love for football. I then played for Bristol City for quite a long time. So this was kind of in the 90s up until I went to university. And then, just because of kind of age and university stuff, I kind of dropped football for a bit. But when I graduated, I was lucky enough to work for Umbro, which is kind of like the OG football. I mean, I loved watching the Beckham documentary recently, just to kind of see all that kind of 90s and early 2000s stuff of the big baggy shirts with Umbro on and the dodgy pitches and stuff like this. It was great. So yeah, working at Umbro was an absolute dream for me to go and work with a brand with so much heritage. But even then, part of the reason I left was just there was zero focus on women's football. We would spend longer on the baby goalkeeping kits. I mean, who needs a goalkeeping kit for like a 0 to 3 months than we would the women's kits. So that's when I left and started Lexi. And Umbro burned me out a little bit with football because it was just so full on all the time. And I was quite young, and I just found it quite intense. So then I stepped away. But in recent years, there's obviously been a lot more interest in women's football, and I've started to kind of be like, okay, like, this is a real change from when I was a kid. I even remember when Bend It Like Beckham came out, and me and my best mate were furious because at the end of Bend It Like Beckham, spoiler alert, they go off to America to play for the league. And we were like, but that's just not realistic. Like, that doesn't happen. Like, you can't do that. Which of course you could, but it was so kind of tiny. Whereas now girls are really getting support, and the game is growing, and we are seeing money put into it. The flip side of this is we're now seeing a huge amount of ACL injuries, which is something that's always been going on in the women's game. But because there were fewer players, there was less of a light shined on the game. It was less spoken about and less noticed. My graduate collection at Falmouth was actually a women's football collection that incorporated kind of injury prevention and injury recovery into the garments. So, I mean, even then I was aware of ACLs and the fact that this was happening. But it was I kind of put it to bed. But I mean, I think the last Women's World Cup, over 30 players at that level who would have been in squads were out with just ACL injuries. So you could have made an entire squad of the women that weren't able to play just from ACL injuries. And I think it's in the last 18 months, nearly 200 elite players are out, including obviously Leah Williamson, who's just come back. And off the top of my head, I think she was out for around 200 days. So that was her recovery time. And when you consider as well, she's a top flight player, she's going to be receiving the best treatment, rightly so. But that's a long time in a young woman's career to be out. She missed the World Cup, which she would, of course, have captained off the back of the Euros. So it has a huge kind of mental impact for players like her. We've just lost Sam Kerr to an ACL injury. And then there's huge stats to say as well that a lot of these injuries are, I think it's like 64% are from non-contact. So they might be, Sam Kerr's was just on a warm-up training camp, or a lot of them are kind of, they might go in for a tackle, but they pull up before the tackle. So it's not the actual tackle, it's just the movement, or it can just be as simple as a slip on the pitch. So it's really, really impacting the game. And I do think people are starting to pay more attention, but the issue we've got is that it's a really complex injury, and therefore you're needing to pull a lot of research from different kind of almost departments, as it were, together to formulate a plan for the kind of female football industry as a whole. And it's something that we need to kind of get together quickly. There needs to be a lot of collaboration and communication, and then implementation of these strategies, because I am so jealous of girls like Leah Williamson. I mean, they fought the good fight, do not get me wrong, they deserve to be where they are. But right now, it's like, we're really on a tide change for women's football, I feel. They're at the forefront of that. And then to be, out with this injury when you could be on the pitch at this special moment, it's just heartbreaking for them. And even like, I look at it and just think, I just feel so awful for them to have worked that hard and then potentially be missing out on your golden years of your career, which is short anyway. So yeah, working on that.
I mean, those stats are just crazy. I had no idea as to the scale of this. And so can you tell us a bit more about the research? I have heard about it in the press, but, is there a common denominator? A lot of people have said, the boots are designed for men. It's around redesigning the footwear. What have you found so far?
So generally, up until now, I think people have gone, menstrual cycle, women's bodies. That's certainly a part of it. Don't get me wrong. Another part of it, as you say, is equipment. Most female football players are playing in boots designed for men. There's a great brand in Australia called Ida, who actually make boots designed for women. They're shaped differently, and that supports the foot and the ankle in a better way. So those guys are doing amazing work on kind of that side. The pitches themselves, when you sometimes look at the pitches that these elite athletes are playing on, it's just going back to the Beckham documentary. You're looking at those pictures and you're like, it's the same pictures, cool. The men would just never be expected to play on pitches like that. Sometimes in conditions like that as well. Sometimes I think they're allowing the women's games to go on when they wouldn't necessarily allow the men's to go on. And another big factor is the frequency. So back in my day at Umbro, we went to Man City. So, I mean, you're talking now, at least 10 years ago, went to Man City. And at that point, 10 years ago, they were saying, we're just introducing a school for kind of 6 and 7-year-olds. They're going to come and be part of the academy. And then they were showing me how they would video the young boys running up and down, and then assess the videos and kind of like look for their knees being slightly out of line or their elbows being slightly, and at kind of 6 or 7, they're making those adjustments with those lads. And then as they were kind of getting older and into high school age, they'd be living at the club full-time football focus. Obviously our girls aren't getting that. And so they're not prepared for the step up that we've had in recent years in terms of the amount of games and the amount of training. I mean, some of these girls are getting no off season if they play internationally, and for a top level club is really, really tricky for them. That on its own is one kind of issue, but also the fact that they haven't had this support from young. My daughter plays, and she's just joined a new team, and I'm going to be speaking to them, because one of the things that's really important with ACLs is kind of warm ups and warm downs. Now, you go to any kids club, they'll do a warm up. Will they do a warm down? Absolutely not. But we need to be giving our girls the tools to do what they can. We may not be able to change the entire industry overnight. It's taken us this long to get to this point. I mean, women's football was more popular than the men's pre-war. And now we're only just getting to the point where we're starting to fill stadiums again. So it's a long journey. But if we can start the next generation with simple things that don't cost anything, just do a simple warm down after training, that's great. If we can support brands like Ida and get these boots more readily available, and then make the choices as a consumer, actually, I'm going to buy a boot that fits her foot better, so she's got the right equipment, we can start to make a change. When I started, I thought, designer knee support, job done. It's a good one. There we go. Why has no one done that? And don't get me wrong, I am working on that side of it, because I think there is something important there around, if the girls are going to be on the pitch so much, do they need additional support? But actually, I think it's more a communication piece, and just pulling all these little threads together and being like, here we go. Let's just do this.
The more that I look into these types of issues, I find it's almost like a whole systems change thing. It's not just one thing. There's no silver bullet that's going to solve it. It's looking at all of these different things. And what I loved about what you just said there was, let's just be practical. Like, what's a free thing that you can do? Like warm up cool downs. Why aren't we doing that? That's not something really hard to implement. But like you say, is it just about systems change? And when we think about, the focus the boys get and the girls aren't getting them. And I know that's something that you're really passionate about because you have your daughter. And I'm always fascinated not only by what people do, but why people do it. What motivates them, and who's the person behind, the brand. So I just wondered if you can kind of tell us a little more about the part that plays, your personal life, the fact that you really want to champion and change the world of sport for your daughter, and how that kind of motivates you in what you do.
I think it's really important that both as a mum and a feminist, I also mention I've got a son as well, because otherwise he'll be raging. He'll be like, oh, she got a mention and I didn't. And I think that's actually really important, because I want to fight for women's rights, but a massive part of women's rights is men. And we need to educate our sons as much as we educate our women. So yes, she's a strong woman at 8, but also, letting my son see girls do this, and boys need to support them, and boys can do things that have been generally considered feminine roles as well. And I'm very lucky. My husband is very involved with childcare. We share that. He's a shift worker. So we're kind of both around in the house, and he will do all the running around as much as I will. So just from kind of a home basis, and he'll watch women's sports just as much as I will and cheer for that as well. So my daughter and son are kind of growing up in a household that values women's sports as much as men's sports. In fact, my daughter sometimes says, if my husband says to my daughter, do you want to watch the rugby? And she'll go, is it men's or women's? And sometimes he goes, it's men's. And she goes, oh, no, then, which I think is really interesting. But my background is that my dad raised me originally, and then met and married my stepmom, who I call mum, and I'm very lucky to have her. But I think those years where I was with my dad, I think he didn't know how to raise a girl. So he raised me the way he would have raised any child. And like I said, took me to the football. And I think he was pretty delighted when I took it up as a sport, and rather than the ballet that I gave up after about 3 weeks. So I've always had a very strong male role model, and been told girls can do everything that boys can to the same standard that boys can. And one of my childhood memories is my dad nearly getting into a fight with a parent who said something around, girls can't chest the ball at like a young girls football game and dad being like, get off the sidelines, like we're not having that. So he was a great role model in terms of kind of women's sports and pushing me towards that. So I was very lucky, and it is something I've been really, really passionate about and remain really passionate about.
I think that's such a good point. I didn't know you had a son, Lily, so that's why I didn't mention him. But yeah, I also have a girl and a boy. And, I think we can forget that it takes everybody to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of women really championing other women, but, this is a society change that we need to bring about. And we need to educate our children, to respect everybody and that we are all the same. And often that narrative can go one of two ways. It can go about, women are really strong, women are the best. And I think it's about taking everybody along, and actually just changing the system sometimes, isn't it? And changing the narrative and changing the language. It's not about, boys versus girls, which, I had growing up. I think it's about, like, why aren't we all doing this together? Why those kind of societal barriers there in the first place?
I think it's really interesting though, when you said, oh, we're all the same. And I think we're not all the same. We're not. There's differences between men and women, but that doesn't mean either should be valued any less. And I think when it comes to sport, that's a challenge. Previously, a lot of guys would say, oh, I don't want to watch women's football, it's rubbish. But it wasn't rubbish. It was just, it's a different style of game. When you watch the women's football, generally there's a lot less kind of pushing someone over, rolling on the floor for 10 minutes, blah, 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 and then getting up and you're fine. We don't tend to do that as much in women's football. And I think that's probably because there's not so much money wrapped up in the game at the moment. Whether that will change later on, because there's the pressure to get that ball, to score that goal, to win that cup, because it's multi-millions of pounds. I don't know. But I think we need to learn to value things for what they are. And yes, women's sports are different to men's sports, but that doesn't mean they can't be as revenue driving, as impactful. And I would just like to just take a moment to give a shout out to Miss Taylor Swift, who at the moment has single-handedly changed the NFL and created a ton of revenue there. And she hadn't even picked up a ball. I mean, that girl, if you want to talk about women in sports. So, it is a joke, but actually it's true. Do you know what I mean? This year has been really impactful for women, and outside of sports, with the tours, Beyonce and Taylor, and the money they've made and what they've done. So I think, the tides are changing and people are listening in positions of power because there's a monetary impact. But if we can steer that impact to be ethical, sustainable, and beneficial towards a more equal society, then I'm here for that.
I feel like that was a mic drop moment, Lily. I feel like you just topped it there. I couldn't end on a higher note, to be honest, Lily. I think it was amazing. I just wanted to check if there's anything else that you want to add.
No, I don't think so. Other than, I think this is going to be an amazing series, but I would like to continue the conversation outside. And as part of this series, I'm on Instagram and I've got my website and stuff. So if someone listens and it's like, actually, there's more of a conversation here, then please, I just encourage people to reach out, because I think if there's one takeaway from this episode and probably the series, it's like connections and communication are the way we're going to make change and influence things. And I was so delighted to be invited on to have this discussion with you, because I think it's so important to give platforms to voices that maybe aren't being heard, but are hopefully doing something interesting, which I hope I am. And I can only make change if others around me collaborate and help, and hopefully that in turn helps them. So I think I would love that to be the takeaway from this is collaboration, especially within women. That's the way we can move this forward.
100%. I think it's all about collaboration. It's about lifting each other up, and also really championing when people can do things better than us, almost like redirecting people to experts. I will make sure that all of your socials are on the show notes. And if anybody needs help with anything to do with sportswear or is interested in Lily's research, please do reach out to her and contact her directly. And I'm sure in the future we will have you on other mini-series to discuss the results of your research as well. But for now, Lily, thank you so much. Thank you for being my first guest. It's been super exciting, and I've just loved the range of kind of different topics that we've talked about. Everything kind of from, you know, a 101 of starting your first business and lessons learned to ACL injuries and, you know, what practical things that we can do about it. And also just about the state of women's sport. You know, I feel we've covered a lot, and I'm sure we will dig into it much more in future series. But right now, Lily, thank you so much. Really grateful for you being our first guest.
Thank you so much. It was an honour. Thank you.